Hi, Toy Soldiers here, and what we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at the difference between reactive control and proactive control. And I actually got asked to do this video, so I did a little bit of research, and it kind of changed what I sort of understood as my perspective of what proactive control was. But yeah, we'll get into that. So I'm hoping that at least at this point you've seen my last video on control, because we're going to be kind of using that as the basis on how we define control. So control is defined on who gets to make the decisions given on a card, on a situation, on an occurrence, whatever. It's whoever gets to make the decisions on that scenario. And as you can see, I have some stuff laid out here. I'm going to be trying to simplify what I found in the best way possible. And I want to kind of forward this video with kind of a disclaimer. This is all very theoretical, or I guess ideal. It's not always 100% going to work like this. So first thing we need to do is we need to define reactive and proactive on their own accord, not even inside UFS. We're just going to define them. And I've printed off these handy definitions. So reactive control, what this is the three main lines here. It says showing response to a stimulus, acting in response to a situation rather than creating or controlling it, and then having a tendency to react chemically. Now, the big thing that I want to show you here is that we're acting in response to a situation rather than creating or controlling it. Now, these two parts are really important when we start getting into the difference between reactive and proactive here, because you're going to notice that. So in order for something to be reactive in terms of its control, you have to be acting in response to something that you did not create. And that's kind of my big takeaway that I got out of looking at the definition of this. So how that sort of led me down into my first round of thinking is that's kind of the most common form of how we view control in UFS, right? That's where you're going to get cards like your Damnation, where you can respond to your opponent creating an enhance or creating a situation, they're creating an effect. We're responding to that effect because we don't want that effect to occur. We're using Damnation to cancel that effect, right? Same thing with good and evil. We're using, your opponent plays a response. We don't want that response to occur. We're using good and evil to prevent that response from occurring, right? A situation is created. We're intervening on that situation to create a result that we want. So tying the definition for reactive, where we're acting in response to a situation, into our definition of what we decided control was going to be, which was who gets to make the decisions. Basically what we're doing is we're taking a decision or an occurrence or a situation or a card played that our opponent did, and we're taking, I guess, the decision-making process away from them after that initial decision was created or made, right? Revoke is another amazing card for that situation, because again, your opponent makes a decision, we revoke that decision, we actually change the direction of that, and we're going to make the decision instead, right? These are the most common forms of control that we have, right? So for examples, again, DLN, E, destroy, draw 2 cards, right? We can cancel that effect with a revoke, right? So they make the decision they're going to enhance with the DLN. We decide that we're going to revoke. And instead of outcome A over here, where they get to draw 2 cards, we divert them to outcome B, where they don't get to draw 2 cards, right? This is what we want. This is what they want. So their decision would lead them to their result. And what we're doing is we're intervening and taking it to our decision instead, right? Damnation is another card that can prevent this situation, right? It takes it into our realm instead of theirs. Right? Same thing with Ice Slasher. Let's say they play Ice Slasher and they want to use the multiple 2 on it, but we don't want to get multiple 2 in the face. So again, Revoke is another one of those cards. They're playing the Ice Slasher, they want to multiple 2 it. We don't want them to multiple 2 it. We're moving them into where we want to make the decision rather than where they want to make the decision. Right? Following along so far? All making perfect sense, mostly, sort of, kind of. Well, where things got really interesting is when I started looking at what proactive control was. Now, proactive control, right, of a person, policy, action, whatever, creating or controlling a situation by causing something to happen rather than responding to it after it has happened, right? So this is interesting. So the big one here is that we are creating. We're the creator in this situation, right? We're causing something to happen rather than responding to it after it has happened, right? So the big things to take away here is that we are creating the environment and we are causing something to happen before something happens, right? Before the situation ever occurs in the first place. Be proactive, prevent potential problems, right? You're trying to intercept the problem from ever happening. So in order to kind of take the proactive definition into the decision-making process of UFS and into the control concept of UFS, you kind of have to be a little bit more aware of how the game flows, right? And this is where things are going to get a little bit more difficult. So we've got DLN again here. Okay, and DLN is going to be E, destroy, draw 2 cards, right? So going back to our reactive, DLN will draw them 2 cards, revoke will then move it to the decision we want. So in order to make this a little bit more simple, we get to draw more pictures, and we can even use our little dummies here, right? So we're going to use blue for Chun-Li. Okay, that'll be us. Vega will be bad, he'll be orange. Okay, Vega wants to play DLN, and he wants to draw 2 cards. Okay, this is Vega, right? He's here, he wants to get here. That's his idea. Reactive control is simple because reactive control is where we step in at this point and we move them down to here, which is don't draw 2 cards. Or just don't draw cards. Right? Make sense? Okay. This is reactive control right here, right? Vega wants to get here. Chun-Li intercepts and takes him down here instead, okay? By playing a revoke, by playing, you know, whatever, damnation, good and evil, all the examples that we said. Fantastic, great stuff, right? We're taking the effects that he wants and we're taking them somewhere else, okay? Proactive control is a little bit more difficult, and it's really hard for lots of new players to understand because it involves something never occurring in the first place. This is easy to understand because when someone triggers DLN, we know what happens next, right? So it's easy to get in between those 2 effects and change it. But where proactive control gets difficult, right? Going back to Vega, he wants to play DLN, right? Because he wants to draw cards. Okay? Remember what the definition of proactive is. Proactive is us creating the environment that this never occurs, right? So this is a possibility, right? This still can happen. Proactive control means Chun-Li has to intervene here instead of over here, right? We need to do something here that makes Vega go down here by himself. Okay, is this starting to make sense to you? Right? So whatever Chun-Li does here has to make Vega decide to go this way instead by himself, right? That's the thing about proactive control that makes it so difficult for people to understand, especially this player here, right? Vega will oftentimes never know that he's actually being controlled, whereas Chun-Li, being a stronger player, always knows and feels in total control of the match. Whereas someone like Vega might start blaming things like luck, or might start blaming like other things like, oh, I made the best decisions I could and it still didn't work out. Because really, Chun-Li was controlling the match in the first place. Before situations ever occurred, she was preventing them from happening because she was smart, right? There are some subtle ways to do proactive control, and there's some very deliberate ways to do proactive control. So we'll go into the very deliberate ways to put proactive control, right? One of the easiest ways for deliberate proactive control is a card like Novitiate, right? Or however you want to pronounce it, I probably butchered it. First form, destroy. For the rest of this turn, players cannot play abilities that gain vitality or grant damage penalties. Or form, for the rest of this turn, players cannot play abilities that add cards to their hands, right? So if Chun-Li plays Novitiate, Vega just can't play DLN, right? This is 100% canceling this bridge, right? That's essentially what this card's doing, is it's negating this effect from ever being able to take place, which means that her action over here is preventing DLN from ever triggering. That's one form of proactive control. This is very hard proactive control. Now, where things get super complicated is when you get into very suggestive proactive control, where things aren't 100% clear, right? So let's look at another example. Let's look at, okay, let's say now Chun-Li over here is running admission fees, okay? And she opens up her attack string with Party Crasher. Okay? So if she's got admission fees on the table, she's opening up with Party Crasher. Vega doesn't want to die. Is he going to trigger his DLN 001? Do you think he's going to want to trigger this to draw 2 cards? Well, obviously the game state's going to dictate whether or not he's going to choose to not draw 2 cards or draw 2 cards. But this is a situation where a strong player can use cards to influence the opponent's decision-making process. And you can do things like running cards like these, where they're not exactly hard control, but they strongly encourage your opponent to make certain decisions. There was a card a few sets ago called Best of Both Evils, and it had a ability where you could commit it to discard a foundation. Your opponent would have to discard a card, or you can discard an action, or what was it? No, an attack card, and your next control check to play an attack, I think, got boosted or something like that. And people always looked at that card and they're like, man, that card's really good for killing people because, you know, you can discard their hand and then just murder their faces. And yes, that card was great for that. But where that card really truly shone was that you could use it to outbuild your opponent. And what I mean by that is that just putting a card like that on the table where you have the power to discard cards from your opponent's hand at will forces your opponent to make decisions where they won't play as many cards during their turn, which means that you can build more cards during your turn, and your opponent every turn is going to typically hold more cards. Therefore, you can get ahead and build advantage, right? That's a very subtle way of having proactive control. You're playing a card with the intention of making them make a decision that you want them to make instead of a decision that they may have wanted to make or would have made otherwise. You kind of starting to see where I'm getting with this whole thing, right? Chun-Li needs to do things to stop Vega from going over here. You're constantly trying to convince him to go to your decision-making area, right? Good. Now, there's tons of other things that you can do that are proactive control. Like obviously, Hunt for Spiders and Dragons is a really strong card right now because obviously you can snipe problems and prevent this situation from ever occurring in the first place. War for Armageddon's another great card for that thing. Cards like Clash of Colossals or reactive style, right? Momentum control. This kind of card prevents Ice Slasher multiples before they can ever actually occur, right? You kind of just need to start looking at things like, yes, Revoke is just one of many ways to prevent getting Ice Slasher multiple, but you need to be creative in the ways that you're going to approach negating effects, right? You can either cut them off here, you know, you can cut them off at this point after the decision's been made, you can react to that situation and then prevent that from happening, or you can be preemptive and stop the scenario where they can make that decision, stop that from being able to happen, or influence them to make a different decision, right? Those kind of things. There's tons and tons and tons of different ways that you can prevent people from making decisions. You just kind of have to be, like I said, creative about it. There's also another technique called block baiting that I should probably mention while I'm doing this, in that, let's say you go through your opponent's discard pile, you're a couple turns into the game, you notice, okay, their whole kill condition's in Cowboy Battery and it's got a low block, that's +2. Well, then if you're playing a character like, say, Cammy, who can just change zones, well, now you know if you focus low and they're trying to pocket Cowboy Batteries to kill you, well, you have a pretty good chance of trying to bait out that Cowboy Battery into a block, right? And again, the stronger that your attack line is, the more suggested they're going to be to come down to your decision side of things, where they're going to have to block with that Cowboy Battery, right? Because they're going to want to play that Cowboy Battery and kill you. So especially if you can get that attack to lethal and they have no other way to prevent it from killing them, they're going to obviously block with a Cowbat. So just remember these kind of things, right? Try to make decisions that can prevent things, especially when you're playing with symbols where you don't have access to direct hate for certain cards. I know we were just having a discussion earlier on the UFS Discord about how life has very few answers to self-destruct. Well, then you just don't need to start being more creative on how you approach that. Maybe you need stronger recovery mechanics to try to make up for it, or maybe you need to get ahead of them enough that you can blow past them, or I don't know. You just need to figure something out. That's kind of all I'm trying to get at here. And that's sort of what I discovered when I was researching the difference between proactive control and reactive control. And I always thought that proactive control was deliberately running specific things to counter specific things. Like, oh, I know I'm going into a throw met, I'm going to run a Phideophobia. But that still falls under our reactive definition of decision making and our opponent creating the scenario that we are then trying to intercept. It doesn't quite fall under the we're creating the scenario that prevents the situation from happening in the first place. So anyways, I hope this video was educational in some way. I know I learned a bit when I was doing this, and yeah, it helped me out a bit. So it gave me something to chew on from my brain, and hopefully it helps you a little bit. Yeah. Anyways.